Hi, friend.
Hi, friend.
And to the brave hearts listening out there, welcome to Permission to be Human. I'm Andrea.
And I'm Janelle.
Get ready for some real-time relationship woo and wisdom
from the front lines with occasional tantrums and tears
about how breaking rules, blurring boundaries, and tossing tradition can be catalysts for finding your truth.
Let's debunk the fairy tales we were told as children and create a new map for life.
Yes, Disney can go fuck itself.
If you're seeking permission to choose your own path,
freedom is the new F word, people,
and want to feel less alone along the way,
we got you.
Please note, this is our side of the story. Our partners and metamors have their own individual experiences, and we do not speak for them.
Hey, Andrea.
Hey, Janelle. Good morning. This was the night of our monthly sleepover.
Yeah, it was so fun.
Yeah, we had such a good time. We wore unicorn masks.
You mouth taped for the very first time.
I mouth taped. What does this even mean?
It means that there's a biohack, not necessarily proven by any scientific studies. However, the idea that if you tape your mouth shut while you're sleeping, there are some benefits. One is that breathing through your nose is better for your nervous system. Two is making sure your mouth doesn't get dry. So like dry mouth from sleeping with an open mouth is not good for your roots of your teeth. So that's another benefit. But what was the other benefit that you discovered?
I would say there are two additional experiences. One is I can't talk anymore. Oh, fuck. I like to talk. Our conversation was cut off. There was no more good nights. No more, oh, Janelle, I wanted to tell you. Nothing. So that's an interesting feeling. I can see that helping me stop processing the day when I go to sleep. I can see why that's helpful. The second one is you sort of feel like a kidnapping victim. I'm just like, oh, my mouth is taped. I feel like somebody in a movie. So it's interesting as well.
What did that feeling bring up in you? Was that like panic? Oh my gosh. Because for some people that would feel probably horrible and have zero interest in experiencing mouth tape.
And not so bad for me. It was fine. Yeah.
It's not an association that I have with it, interestingly. So that's why I'm like, oh, never crossed my mind until you said that. Yeah.
So interesting. Yeah. Yeah, that's even like a lyric.
Of course it's a lyric.
Of course it's a lyric. Like in this song Houndmouth, that I now adore, who I saw at Hinterland Music Festival, they have a song called Hey Little Hollywood, I think it's called. And they say, the devil in his rush, his duct tape makes you hush. And so, yeah. So, I mean, I think about the devil duct taping my mouth when I run. So yeah, it's like so fresh. And I probably saw it in a movie in the last month, like somebody being trapped. So interesting experience. And I kind of like it.
Something to experiment with.
Absolutely. So speaking of experiences, today we're talking about some different experiences we've had throughout our life and the lessons we've learned.
Yeah, Bravehearts, one thing as a reminder is that Andrew and I have known each other for about 5 years. We talk all the time. And yet every day on almost every podcast, there's like, oh, I didn't know that about you. So these get to be like discoveries for each other in our friendship and deepening our understanding of one another as well.
Absolutely. And today we have stories about relationships, instincts, and privilege. So
how about you start?
Okay, I'll start. So maybe 8 years ago, my husband's high school girlfriend wrote to him on Facebook, explaining that she would be in town for several months, supporting her husband, who's the creator and star of this show at Denver Performing Arts Complex. And she's like, do we want to get together? Now, I knew the girls that had come before me in my husband's life. I'd stalked them all at some point in that now socially acceptable way. I mean, I was endlessly curious about the women my husband had loved. Like, why wouldn't I be?
And I love that what used to be called stalking is now socially acceptable.
I wanted to always connect with these women because we both loved the same man, right? I mean, there was one in college who I'd heard the whole story about. There's another one that came right before me. So, there are little stories trickle into our relationship here and there. And I love connecting with old parts of myself. And I wanted that for my husband too. So I was in. I was like, yeah, let's totally go meet her. All my friends at the time, this is almost a decade ago, thought it was totally weird that we were going out with a possibly attractive, possibly unhappily married old flame of my husband's. They're like, are you crazy? Like, that's so dumb. Like, it was risky.
Interesting.
My husband and I just were more open-minded, shocking than usual. So it didn't seem that risky to us. And I saw their point, I suppose. I mean, I'd actually never seen her picture. So we went to...
Also a sign of the times. Like you didn't, it wasn't on the phone.
Right. I couldn't. Yeah. And I did remember looking up on Facebook and like didn't know what she looked like. Couldn't find her picture. But Facebook was it. We went to the show and we met them at the merch table afterward. And she was full of light and I hugged her. And I think she was kind of surprised that I hugged her. And I had looked at the address of this really cool speakeasy. You know, they had like a fake front. It's like a pie shop, right? And you go in a secret door. But then strangely, when she suggested that we go to Rock Bottom, like a boring chain restaurant in downtown Denver, I was relieved, right? Because it just sounds easier, right? I didn't have to try to be cool. We drank beer, we exchanged earnest glances, and we felt, you know, vaguely connected, I guess, by the fact that we were all okay with this. It was just like an odd thing to do. And remember, like a long time ago, you didn't do this often. Now you're always connecting with like old people that you haven't seen in ages. But it seemed strange at the time. And, you know, I eventually relaxed. Like they didn't mind that I had this like huge oil and gas client that I was embarrassed about or that I talked too much. And we didn't care about their big as a plate of nachos age difference. She was a science teacher and she was volunteering at the Botanic Gardens, and they lived together in a ranch style house in the suburbs.
Suburbs of Colorado?
No, suburbs somewhere else. And so, you know, they were just like normal people. And we ended up at their on location condo, passing around a one hitter. And it was then that my husband said to her, wow, back then I was completely in love with you. And she looked down, like kind of clearly embarrassed, but strangely, I was not. I was just like, yeah, he really was, you know? And then right before we left, she disappeared into her bedroom and brought out the same sort of wannabe hipster shirt that I was wearing in the opposite color.
Oh my gosh, amazing.
We were all sort of like pleasantly unsurprised at like, oh, we're kind of alike. And I sort of love her. And I'm glad that my husband had loved her. And it was so beautiful. And on the way home, I told my husband how like a lot of people don't understand what we did tonight. They thought it was risky. And he said, but we can't be each other's everything. And at the time, I'm like, you know, I smiled and considered how this contradicts every movie quote I've ever memorized. And I'm like, but no, actually, that is what I was told. And he's like, you know, these people just like occupy this little room in our heart. And I realized that, you know, I have a room in my heart for my high school boyfriend, for example, too. It was a great lesson and probably a beautiful foreshadowing of our future.
Of your future, yeah. Is that your first time of him acknowledging you can't be everything to everyone? Or is that like your memory of like, oh, that's the first time this concepts start to seep in? You don't have my entire heart. It's a little part of my heart that still is attached to this person here because of the time that we had together.
And even though it felt initially a little jolting when he said that, I was like, oh yeah, he's totally right. Like, of course I have fondness for my high school boyfriend. That'll never go away. That has nothing to do with my husband.
Right. Yeah. And I can relate to that as well. I remember dating someone for a period of time who was extremely, extremely jealous of any past relationships that I had had. And really being confronted by that, confronted and confused and having to navigate that for a long time. The relationship didn't last. And really in the ending, I was like, this person who, yes, I've had sex with has been a friend for 20 years and I'm not going to give him up.
Exactly.
So realizing that I was like, no, like this person is a part of me. And if you're going to accept me and love me, then you need to accept and love all parts of me. Not that you have to become friends with this person, but it's got to be okay that I'm still friends with this person. And that really informed my next relationship of like, I'm now setting that as a standard that someone has to be okay with, that my heart has many rooms in it.
Yeah, beautiful. Your heart has many rooms and they are all going to stay intact. And would you say, even though the current partner maybe occupies the biggest room?
Yes. And like, the one that's very present. But it's like, it would be as if I was to say, oh, that high school boyfriend, which of course, like the first person any of us date has a huge impact. Wouldn't give that up because it was special in its own right.
Absolutely. And totally different.
Yeah. Not able to be replicated because it was the first.
Exactly. Beautiful. Yeah, I agree. It was a great experience. Okay, so you're talking about your relationship one.
Yeah. So my relationship one has to do with travel, in that my first big trip after college, I traveled to New Zealand and then Nepal. It was a 4.5-month journey inspired by a friend of mine. She and I mountain biked raced together, and she was just finishing her MBA. We got along, we biked all the time together. And she was like, great, I would love to bike New Zealand. And I was like, great, I'd love to do that too. And I would love to go to Nepal and climb Everest base camp. And she was like, great, I want to do that too. So she planned the New Zealand part and I planned Nepal part. We got to New Zealand. And in day one, she said, oh my God, you're using so much floss.
Oh, that's a good one. Wow.
And in that moment, I was like, oh, no. Okay. I was like, well, we could buy more floss if we run out of floss. We are in countries that have floss. But I heard her concern. And then, so we biked 1,000 miles across 6 weeks in New Zealand. And so we were touring. So we had like everything on our bikes, wow. Tents, food, camping gear, all of that stuff. And we were in a tent together, like a 2-person small tent. And what she said was, I need to take my shirt off. Can you look away?
I'm like, oh my God, I'm totally laughing. They shouldn't be laughing. Some people are private. That's totally okay.
Totally okay. There's nothing wrong with it. But as you and I just slept naked last night in bed together in our sleepover, and we're both
just more. Especially if you're going to be in a tent together.
Exactly. In that moment, I felt the constriction of myself. Like, in order to accommodate her needs, like I had to kind of be on guard, it felt like. And it was like in these moments, like in the first 3 days where I was like, oh my gosh, we are so in sync and so connected, like biking. And there's certain things that are really like easeful, but actually this daily interaction of things that I had never evaluated before were suddenly coming to the surface of like, oh, we're really fundamentally very different. She was not a hugger. And so here we were like in this very intimate camping, biking, like experience for 6 weeks. And there was no physical contact between us. And I'm not talking about sexually. I'm talking about just like a hug. During the course of the trip, we started to talk less and less. Like a divide definitely came up between us. And I started to see the things that I was really like desperately craving. And one was affection. And for those of you who have traveled the world, like you can have like an immediate, instant, like 5-minute conversation with someone and be like, oh my gosh, like we just dropped in and I feel really connected to you. So anytime that happened, that at the end of it, I'd be like, can I give you a hug? Can I give you a hug? And really seeking affection from strangers in this way of anyone I met along South Island of New Zealand.
Oh my God. Sorry, can I have a comment? Raising my hand. Because I'm just thinking about how you like just had your, Janelle just recently got a flat tire on the side of the road and was going to have to call someone and, oh shit, of course we're in town. And so it's really not like a big deal. But someone eventually stops to help her. He's super great. And then she's like, oh, can I do anything for you? And he's like, no, I'm good. And she's like, how about a hug? And then he came in and he was like, okay, awkward. Not a hugger.
Not a hugger, but he used to say, he said yes, I was in consent.
And then he gave you some honey.
And then gave me, yes. Yeah, it was a very sweet thing. But it was this of like there's so many lessons of this journey. As I stated in the beginning, right, she inspired this trip. And so what I recognized was that, oh, I really needed her to be the catalyst. I go back to New Zealand. And then at the end of the trip to be like, oh, I would rather be alone than traveling with someone that I'm not compatible with. But I needed to have this experience in order to get there. After New Zealand, we got to Nepal. And Nepal was the country that I had researched. She's also, during this time, had a boyfriend at home in Colorado who she was really missing. So he met us in Nepal and they ended up getting engaged on our first week there. So she was with him for a week. He was going to go back to Colorado and then she and I were going to hike to base camp together. And we started out hiking and what became clear was that like, she was like, Nepal was not her scene. She was like, oh, it's not as clean. It's more fourth world. Like there's not plumbing. She wasn't prepared for that country. And admittedly and understandably, her heart was now with her boyfriend newly engaged. We had already started on the trek. So I'm in the middle of the Himalayas in Namche Bazaar. And she was like, I'm actually going to turn around. We had another 2 months together. She's like, I'm going to turn around and go back to Denver. And I was like, okay, bye. So she left. And then I suddenly found myself alone in the Himalayas. This is in 2000. So there were internet cafes. Remember those?
Remember those, yeah.
But I had already started the trek, so I wasn't in communication with anyone. Like everyone knew I was doing base camp and I would be in touch in about 3 weeks. I was like, wow, I am now alone. I definitely had a moment of like loneliness, fear. And then almost as instantly, I was like, oh my gosh, this feels so good. I think of Everest Base Camp as a pilgrimage because you are having to walk at a certain pace. The acclimatization of the altitude means that whoever you start with, it doesn't matter how fast you are, how healthy you are, the altitude is a equalizer. And a whole bunch of us got off a plane, landed in Lukla and started hiking, meant that everyone on that plane was gonna, like every night, even if you like walked faster during the day, you'd be in the same town at night or in the same tea villages. So I immediately, after she left, ended up just like walking in cadence, I remember, with Reinhold and E.T. One was from Germany, one was from Israel. And I was like, hey, can I walk with you guys? And they were like, yeah. And we ended up at the same cadence, just like walking and sharing stories for like many, many, many days. So easily, so connectedly. We ended up celebrating my birthday, my 26th birthday at base camp. And they each gave me a chocolate bar. And it was like so sweet. There's many more things that happened in the course of those 3 weeks. I met people from other countries, from other places where we had these deep connections. And at the end of that trek, I felt so much more connected and less alone than I did when I started. It was this realization of, she's a good person. And we were not compatible for my being to feel comfortable. While she was a catalyst to get me to go on the trip, I would not choose a partner like that again to travel with. And that, in fact, I would rather travel alone because my energy was open to the meeting others. Everything just became more easeful. Because I think other people's whose heart was open to meeting strangers, then we were just on that same vibration. And I realized that my fear of traveling alone was totally moot. And that happened when I was 25. And I have not had a fear of traveling alone since then. And a lot of people I know do have that fear, but it was this recognition of being with the wrong travel partner was way more lonely than being alone.
I hear this being very applicable in life. And I particularly remember watching Ally McBeal when I was in my 20s and her saying, sometimes I feel more alone with him than I do with alone. And I'm like, oh, interesting. Can you feel alone with someone? Mm-hmm. You did. You felt alone with your travel partner because you couldn't connect with her. Yeah. There was a divide. She was shut down. You were shut down. It wasn't working. And that's an amazing lesson when you're with anyone, whether it's a friend or a partner or a travel partner.
Yeah, I think it really helps me. So that happened when I was 25. And I think I always had a travel bug. And before that was oh my gosh, I'm single. I can't travel.
Right.
And I think it helped me not be in a relationship with a romantic partner for the reason of wanting someone just to travel with.
I feel like I need to go travel alone.
Have you never?
No.
Yeah, I think you'd be really comfortable. Once you'd be extremely anxious until you get there.
Of course, but then I would be fine. I mean, and because obviously I just meet people constantly.
Alone is almost like the misnomer because whether you can do a group trip or you can travel solo. This is why I love staying in hostels at different times because they're just automatic places of community gathering.
Of course, and not to say I've never traveled alone. I mean, I have traveled alone, but I have not. My big travels across Europe, across Asia, Middle East, we're not alone. Okay, are we on to instincts?
Yes. What do you got?
Okay, so this is an old story. I got to caveat it. This is a long time ago. This is literally 19 years ago. Okay, so I was a different person 19 years ago. I was a different person 9 months ago. So keep that in mind.
But I'm also going to say that as you talk through this, that the energy that you're holding there, I think is ageless. don't think it's like dated.
No, it's not dated.
Just dated for you.
Yes. It's dated for like whenever you went through this developmentally.
Yes.
So this is really about my relationship with my instincts, which has been a long road. Let's just say that. I mean, I think I've said that, yeah, I mean, I had such a bad relationship with my instincts for, I would say, a big chunk of my life that they threatened to pack up and move out because they were just like, you're not listening to us. We're leaving. So back in 2002, my husband did something a little strange. So we were living together, maybe the first few years of our relationship, and I was sitting in this back kind of mudroom area where my office was. And he approached my office from the wrong side of the house. He usually came in the back where he parked the car in the garage. And so he came in and I was like, what's going on? And he's like, well, I brought some people home with me. And I'm, looking at my like sweatpanded freelance self with anxiety about like, I'm like, oh my God, we're gonna have to host his colleagues. But I was panicking for the wrong reason because it turns out he brought home a couple of hitchhikers. Let's just back up for a second. As a child, my parents told me never to hitchhike. Like it was definitely up there with doing heroin. Do not do it. Like never. Don't get on a motorcycle, don't do drugs, and don't hitchhike.
Yeah, same.
Don't you think? Same. I remember eventually traveling abroad and being like, oh, people are hitchhiking here. And it's a very different mentality. I mean, in the United States, there's something about people not having a car that's like, why don't they have a car? Because so many people have cars. Maybe it's more accessible. And of course, tons of people don't have a car, I'm sure. But the people I had been raised with had cars.
Right. In the Midwest. Yeah.
Exactly. And especially in the Midwest because distances are great. And amidst a multitude of warnings by my parents, this one had really stuck. But my boyfriend was not really a rule guy. He was more of an instincts guy, for sure. And that stands today. And my instincts and I have always had a complicated relationship. I wasn't mending that relationship today, and he's like, he looked at me and he's like, it was raining, and he just shrugged. He knew that he was testing my risk tolerance. He's like, they looked harmless. So I'm skeptical. I'm walking through the house, but I'm also an extrovert. Like I love meeting new people. And so I come out to the porch and there's these two Native American women with their like long black hair and like tentative smiles. They were no longer hitchhikers. They were just strangers I hadn't met. And I love a good stranger. And so I was like, okay, it's cool. So they stayed for dinner and they were traveling cross country toward a vision quest, a traditional ceremony, a fasting ritual. Imagine you know about that, Janelle, which results in spiritual guidance, right? And I found them fascinating. I'd grown up in a part of the country where landmarks and colleges like commemorated their culture because really the name of their tribe is Mississippi. It's actually derived from the Ojibwe word Mississippi, meaning great river. And so I was fascinated by their stories. I'd never spoken with a Native American myself, but I'd seen all these different statues and parks. And so we ate spaghetti, we drank wine on our dingy like 20-something back patio. We had these like squirrel-eaten cushions and like this table where the dirt got trapped beneath it. It was like nothing special, but they didn't care. They were mothers that had grown children. They were really nice. They were grateful for our hospitality. We smoked cigarettes. We listened to the stories about life on a reservation. And when they asked to camp in our backyard, my boyfriend wanted to offer them our guest bedroom. I had almost forgotten my anxiety, but like not quite. And I was like, no, all my jewelry's in there. I was kind of like crawling back in my like comfortable rule-driven cubby hole. And he looked at me like bewildered, annoyed. And I could tell he was thinking, he's like, aren't you paying attention? Like these people are really nice. Like they're good people. Like why are you putting them back in this dangerous hitchhiker bucket? And couldn't I trust my intuition instead of just like defaulting to society's rules? But I wasn't good at that then. Like I just wasn't. I was like, no, there's a script. We're supposed to follow it. So, I knew he was right. So I relented. I didn't say anything. I wasn't good at swallowing my pride back then. So the hitchhikers like slept atop my duvet and didn't even dig into the sheets or anything. The next morning, my husband drove them to the highway. In our house, nothing was missing. And I feel like everything was quiet except for my instincts because they were like whispering to each other saying, oh, we just got a win. We just made her do it.
God, that's so good.
Yeah, it really was a watershed moment for me. It was probably the first time I was ever shadow stalking. And of course, I wasn't calling it shadow stalking.
Right. Like here's something you were told and now you're living it. And it's not at all what you were told. Like you were told to be afraid.
Yeah.
Now you're in the situation and you're not afraid. You actually feel comfortable. You're engaged. You're interested. You're connected. And then you went back to but wait, but wait, I should be afraid. Yeah. Okay, but no, I'm not going to be afraid because...
Totally. And it made me feel kind of guilty. Like, oh, why was I afraid of those people because they were hitchhiking? And then I remember telling my friends that, and they're just like, you're not crazy. Like, it's not normal to pick up hitchhikers all the time. Like, it's okay to be a little afraid of that. And I was like, okay, that's true. And in this situation, I was with my husband. Obviously, there was not a huge danger. And so, yeah, so I learned a big lesson. And it is funny now for me to think back to that, because today I would have picked them up.
Yay. Like your instincts are having a little, like, they're doing a celebration.
And my husband would have brought them home. I would have been like, awesome, come in. You can totally sleep here. We'll give you food. Where should we drive you? But, I've gone through a lot of different experiences since then.
I have a little story of, it's not quite hitchhiking because it was paid, but I was coming from Kathmandu and I had just landed in New Delhi in India. And the travel hacks that if you if you get an airport and then you want to hail a taxi or something, if you cross over the bridge outside the ring road, then it's always like a tenth of the price. I'm sure. This is true in countries around the world. So I knew that hack, and I had just come back from these 2 months in Nepal. Oh, I wasn't in Delhi. I was in Bangkok. And so there's scooters and tuk-tuks and all these different types of modes of transportation. And I was feeling so now wise after having been in the world for all of these months that I was like, okay, I'm going to save myself at least $3 if I hitchhike. It's not a hitchhike, I'm paying, but get on the back of a motorcycle taxi. So I remember having my big, huge backpack and my sarong, and I sat side saddle on the back of a stranger's motorcycle, arms around his waist, and giving him the address. And it's midnight in Bangkok in dark streets.
Yeah, awesome. Mm-hmm. It's very empowering. My husband and I we hitchhiked across the Middle East and North Africa. We took some buses, we got free rides, all went very well. So many people stopped to pick us up, and it was such an adventure every time.
Okay, well, how about I go into my story about instincts, also known as my walk-in story.
Okay, let's hear it.
I had forgotten to lock the side door of my house when we had moved a mattress out, like the day before. I hadn't checked it before going to bed. We'd only been in the house for about 3 weeks, and my husband had just left. He was now in Argentina, gone for the weekend, the first time that I was alone in the house. So I woke up at 3:30 to what sounded like a woman talking on the phone. But I was super confused, and I couldn't tell if I was dreaming or where the sound was coming from. I slept against a window, so I was like, oh, maybe I just didn't know I could hear people walking along the sidewalk. But then she walked into my bedroom and turned the light on. She saw me and said, oh, sorry, flicked the light off, turned around, and then wandered into my office. She was dressed up, leather pants, long blonde hair, wearing high heels, but her dripping makeup gave away that she'd had a long night. I couldn't tell if she was talking in another language or in a made-up language. What I figured out, though, is that she wasn't talking on the phone. She was talking to herself. So what I did...
What did you do, Janelle?
I put on my robe. I went to see what she was doing. I left my room. There's a little foyer there, and there was 2 other rooms. She was in the office, and so I'm on a little landing, and I'm asking her questions. And she's not really responding. She's saying a couple words every now and again that I can understand. But I just watched her. She's puttering about. She's looking at herself in the mirror. She picked up a pair of my pink underwear. She didn't respond when I spoke to her, but she also wasn't acting particularly strange, other than she was a stranger in my house at 3:30 in the morning. But I did realize after she wasn't responding, that's oh, I should probably be calling 911. But of course, I hadn't thought to pick up my phone. So I had to go back into next to my bed, grab my phone, called 911. So I'm standing on the foyer, and she walks by me and goes into my bedroom. There, she saw my luggage. I was actually packed and ready to go to Portland the next day for a girls' trip. So she lifted the handle of my luggage and proceeded to walk down the stairs. Thump, 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 thump. I see, and I know in my bag are all some of my favorite clothes and my jewelry and my gifts. And I'm oh my God. Meanwhile, I'm on the phone now with 911 on the dispatcher. And the operator keeps saying, ma'am, keep yourself safe. Ma'am, keep yourself safe. And I'm I'm really probably not doing a great job at that. I realize I'm in very close proximity to her. And then I hear myself say, and I know how ridiculous that I sound as I'm saying this. And I'm but she has my luggage. And the operator, again, ma'am, keep yourself safe. Eventually, the woman goes down the stairs. She wanders around the main floor of my house for a while. And then she goes out the door towards the basement and out. I had figured out at this point that how she'd gotten in. She'd gotten in through this side door, which I hadn't locked. So I figured she was wandering out again with my luggage. And I was like, but alas, no, she doesn't. She takes a left turn and goes down into the basement. And so at that moment, I'm also still confused, but the cops arrive. They walk in, they're like asking what's going on. They ask if she has a gun, and I said no. They ask if I have a gun, and I said no. Are there guns in the basement? I said no. So they said, okay, great. And so they pull out their guns and walked into the basement. And at that moment, I'm sitting on my bench in the foyer on the main floor. And I'm like, oh, please, 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 please let her be safe. I don't want her to harm them. I don't want them to harm her. And just suddenly just realizing, oh my gosh, something could go drastically wrong here. But I hear them coming up the stairs. And at that moment, I'm like, oh, I should go out of sight so she doesn't see me. But I hear her say, oh, but this is my house. And the cops just keep talking to her and bring her out. They end up calling an ambulance, and the cops come back in. And he says, what do you want to do? Do you want to press charges? He's like, I'm also not sure what's going on. The ambulance is coming. She doesn't appear to be she's got a home. She's dressed up, but she's not, making sense. And I said, no, I don't want to press charges. So the cop says, okay. So they leave, and I won't go into the basement. I find my luggage, and I left for my trip a few hours later. Before I left, I realized I had a lot of energy, and I let my body shake and move. And what I really came to is that I felt such compassion for whatever was going on for her, that she ended up at my house at 3:30 in the morning. And that in all likelihood, we have more similarities than differences. Whether she was drugged at a bar stool, a roofie, I don't know, but I easily could have been at a bar stool sitting next to her is what it felt like. There's a part of me that was really glad that my husband wasn't home, because I got to see how I responded to the situation. I thought slowly. I moved slowly. I trusted. I was curious. I didn't panic. And I also recognize that's not the correct response for every situation like that. And I also very much see how her being a white woman and not homeless and not threatening impacted my response. I allowed my instincts to kick in there. But that I also wonder, had she, and then as a white woman, I felt comfortable calling the police and having the police come into my home. So in that way, I got to witness my privilege and the implicit racism at play. Because I also recognize, had she been a Black man, I probably would have reacted very differently, and really getting to see that, that was part of this experience. Mm-hmm. And that I felt safe calling the police, mm-hmm. that a Black woman may not have felt safe calling the police into her home. What were the likelihoods of more violence occurring? After sharing this with a friend, the story, he said, oh, she was really lucky that it was me that she walked in on. And I said, yes. And I said, but I was also really lucky that she was the one who walked in. And so at a time where there's just so much fear and violence, I'm grateful that we crossed paths peacefully. And I really hope that she got what she needed.
So I heard you say the fact that it was a white woman produced a particular type of response from you. And it feels to me like it's just a small nuance, but it needs to say the fact that she was white, the fact that she was a woman, mm-hmm. as well. Mm-hmm. If she had been a white male, what do you think you'd have done?
Right, also different. Absolutely.
You'd have called 911 sooner.
Right, all the experiences would have, my response was very particular to this situation. It had to do with race, had to do with gender, and had to do with class.
Yeah, I'm really trying to put myself in your position. If a woman, that did not have a clear gun, flipped on my light in the middle of the night and said, oh, sorry. I mean, it would have freaked out. I don't think I would have called 911 necessarily, because clearly she wasn't coming at you. She wasn't threatening you. And yeah, it's hard to say what I would have done. And also her demeanor, right, was not aggressive.
Right. She wasn't aggressive. it didn't look like she was looking for drugs. Like there wasn't like a jonesing. She was picking things up like on my desk out of curiosity. She did pick up a dollar bill and she held on to it, but it wasn't like, it didn't have the sense of like, oh my gosh, I'm like trying to stash things in my pocket. She wasn't looking to either steal and or get a fix. It definitely felt like she was on drugs, but not necessarily drugs that she chose to be on.
So impressive how you responded to this. I mean, I remember when I first heard the story.
But did have a charge through my system. And that I also knew I had emotional release tools. And so I ended up doing pillow pounding and shaking and all the stuff just to like let the energy continue to move so I didn't get stuck in my system.
Yeah, good.
But anyway, so those were some of the instincts that I got to see in myself.
Yeah, absolutely. Jeez.
Speaking of privilege.
Yeah. So then we go to a little privilege story. So I've spoken before about the Peace Corps. My husband and I had a really modern Peace Corps experience. We worked at NGOs in the capital city of Bulgaria. That's called Sofia. We ate Indian once a week. We had decent Wi-Fi. We went to a lot of embassy parties. We lived essentially like poor expats. One of the troubles with Bulgaria was this like illusion of modernity led to like colossal mismanagement of expectations about life, because you would get fooled that you're just like, oh yeah, I'm just in the city. And then something would happen and you'd be like, oh yeah, this is harder, right? It's just a little more third world. It's a little harder to figure out. And so stuff like healthcare. The morning of my TB test, right? So I was having a test to see if there was any TB. They had found a strain before I went to the Peace Corps, and I had to take medication for like 9 months before I left.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it didn't mean I had TB, but I somehow had a strain in my blood, which we think I probably picked up in Madagascar when I was rafting there. And I remember at the time, like I couldn't drink for 9 months, which was a totally big fucking deal at 26 or at 29. Yeah. I remember being like, okay, no alcohol. I'm like, oh, wow. Everything revolves around alcohol. At the time, we didn't drink excessively, but we just drank a lot. So that all had happened. And so I had to have this additional test. That morning, a Peace Corps staffer picked me up at our communist block apartment and brought me to this building. We went through these bruised back doors. It looked like a vacant building. I saw not one person for the first 10 minutes. I thought I was like in Halloween. I saw only like sun-stained hallways and silence, no noise, no machines. And then we saw a window. So then we went up to the window and there stood a woman, maybe a 65-year-old woman. She was smoking a cigarette and she was drinking a can of soda. And her traditional like sort of nurse's uniform was not white anymore. And so I'm like, okay, this is the hospital. Super. This is where I'm getting my procedure. Totally freaked out, but she pointed down the hall. I wanted to run, but I waited. And that's when the Peace Corps doctor bailed. He's like, I have another appointment. Would you be okay? Are you going to be okay? And I'm like, okay. I remember sitting in this metal chair against a wall. Still not a person around. Haven't seen anyone except for that nurse with the cigarette. A plant sat beside me. And I remember like it was dead. All of its leaves were totally to the bottom. It was like the leaves on the floor preferred that position. Like they had died a slow death and they were glad it was over. And then the clock on the wall said 7:13. It was not 7:13. And then, so like so many signs being like, wow, this is going to be a weird experience. And so then I did this like mental fetal position thing where I left my body behind and I just like sat really still and like gather up all my fear and anxiety and just like kind of curl up. And I'm like, okay, I'm self-soothing. I'm like, it's cool. I mean, I just need a chest scan. It's not like I'm getting a pap smear. It's just an x-ray. Like it'll be fine. A nurse came to get me. She ushered me into a room and I could see there was this huge, shiny new MRI machine, x-ray machine. I don't know what you'd call it. But upon further inspection, I realized that all the way around the perimeter of the room was like a dark dirt, mud, resin. It's like it hadn't been swept or mopped in many years. This is a little bit frightening, right? Like the windows were so dirty, like couldn't see out them. And I was just like, something doesn't belong here. Yeah, there's like mice holes and grime and scuffs, spilled coffee. And I was just like, oh my God, like, am I going to be okay? And, the machine came to life, like with a green light blinking, and I squeezed my eyes shut. I removed my shirt, slipped out of my bra, arms across my chest, and, I pressed my breast against this like cold metal thing. So I made it out of there alive, and that was fine. And then a week later, I got a call telling me that my scan was unreadable due to the mucus lining in my lungs. And so I had to go back. And so this time I went to a hospital that was quite busy. And there was, the lights were really low. There was only like one fluorescent strip for each of the lights, to save money. Everything was covered in dust. You know, I remember thinking, wow, I would just love to see like a few like mauve paintings of the seashore.
Hospital art.
Right. I'm just like, where's the fucking hospital art? Where are the People magazines, like with the fingerprints on them, a picture of a cat? How about a woman, you know, with a Halloween costume on or with, you know, with a little sticker that said her name? There was such a feeling of loss and like less spirit. And it was scary, right? And I was like, oh, I'm a tidy upper middle class American and I'm accustomed to things looking neat. I'm accustomed to things looking nice and polished to hide what's behind. And I'm used to hospitals like, you know, effectively tucking away the sick people and like just showing me what I needed to see when I went in to get a shot. And I was just like, oh my gosh, am I just so privileged that I've never seen something like this? And I think that's true, right? There's probably ERs here that look like this, that were kind of just scary. And so eventually I went in. This was a little bit better. They all turned around when I took off my shirt and put on my bra. As I left, I just noticed my shunning of this, my whiteness, my privilege, my first world countryness, my judgment. And I just thought, wow, I'm so fortunate to live normally in a place where I can go to the hospital or go to a doctor's appointment and everything is taken care of and it's clean and it's not too busy and there's plenty of light and the elevators work and everything's put together. And yeah, it was a very humbling experience.
And I think what you just described is probably not true of every hospital in America. So I think what you're saying is that there's plenty of
Absolutely
under-resourced, underfunded healthcare facilities.
But I hadn't been to one until I was in a foreign country and really was smacked in the face with that. And as Peace Corps volunteers, we're lucky when we go to get healthcare, right? So we're taken care of from that perspective really well. And so I was grateful for that care. And at the same time, grateful that I would be coming home to the United States, where I knew I also, you know, would have access to clean, functional healthcare facilities.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I'm hearing like that's what you're sharing for me is like one of the real benefits of like trying to quote unquote live in another country versus just vacation in another country. Because when you live there, it's these differences just gurgle to the surface so quickly of, oh, the grocery stores, the doctor's offices, getting from point A to point B without a guide or without just going to the tourist facilities. Like I've learned so much about myself, about my privilege, about cultural differences, assumptions through this simple everyday act of living in another country.
Yeah, exactly. That's when you run into it, is daily activities. Like trying to buy eggs, trying to keep your kids safe.
Yeah, I have another recognition of privilege in my world where it's a little lighter. It doesn't have to do with the hospital. It has to do with a spa. So we were traveling. We'd just gotten engaged in Croatia. And as a surprise, my boyfriend had planned, we were going to Iceland afterwards, and his son and my dad were meeting us, and we were doing this family trip. So we were in Croatia, about to fly to Reykjavik, when one of the people that we were with said, oh, you should go to the Blue Lagoon. It's like a really fabulous spa. Iceland is full of all of these natural hot springs, full of these minerals. It's like the thermal waters that come up from the volcanic rock that's underneath the island. But they're like, oh, but it's really hard to get tickets. But my fiance got on the website, was able to get tickets. And we're like, oh my gosh, great, 3 tickets. So we land and we go straight to the spa. Ironically, my stepson had been there the day before, but he's like, I would totally go back because he'd been in Iceland a few days before us. So we were in line, and it's a long, winding line. You know, it has the people feeders, and there's some obviously like shorter lines over here, depending on what type of offering you get. So we get to the front counter, and then suddenly the guy like looks at our tickets, looks at us and says, please hold. And instead, like one person comes up and approaches us and says, Mr. Orion, please follow me. And so the 3 of us look at each other and we're like, okay. So we follow this concierge through the meandering hallways, up the elevator, through this glass wall that we were overlooking the lagoon until we approach a door that is one of those like James Bond, like large doors that just silently, as you approach it, just like opens. You don't see a person. You don't know why, just like magically senses your appearance. And we walk in. And that was a sign of like, oh, something is afoot here. And inside, on the other side of that door, was a small room with just one person at a front desk who says, oh, we're so glad you're here. Welcome. And please, here's what your day is going to include. It's going to be 4 hours of you get your locker, you get the lagoon. And at this moment, we're like, what ticket did we get? Like, what is this? And they're like, oh, you have like the private service. So what we figured out was that he had misunderstood the currency exchange and where the decimal was. So instead of a $70 day pass to the lagoon, he had bought a $700 day pass to the lagoon. Gosh. And remember, times 3.
Yeah.
So there was this like, oh, that just happened moment. I remember like I have like the pit in my stomach of like, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, that is so much money. That is so much money. That is so much money. And honestly thinking that we were just going to like say, no, thanks. Sorry, mistake. We'd like to get the other type of ticket. My fiance is someone who is like very much of like, okay, here's the moment. What are we doing at the moment? And he was like, okay, this is the moment that just happened. All right, we're here. We're just going to make the most of this moment. He was the one that had bought the tickets. He was the one that was gifting the tickets. And so he just like owned it. Meanwhile, Zaya, who's an incredible negotiator, was like, well, is the beer included? They're like, no, but you're welcome to buy the beer. Is there food included? No, but there's a restaurant just around the corner. And so there's 2 things happened. One, I actually felt myself really constrict because this was so beyond out of my price range of like certainly how I had grown up, panicked almost. And we went and ate and I felt myself like coming back to myself and my partner just being like, it's a mistake. Yes, it's a lot of money, but like, let's just make the most of it. So of course, recognizing making like, to have $2,000 to say we could just make the most of this, like, okay, huge amount of privilege there. But the other thing that happened for me was the awareness of like, oh, what we were paying for was not, it was nicer amenities. Like we had a nicer shower experience, but ultimately we were paying for less people, to be around less people. It wasn't that we were getting like, here's your free meal and here's your free drinks. It was, oh, you get to be in the part of the lagoon that only has 5 people in it versus the 50 that are over in this section over here, or the 500 that are over in this section. And in that moment, I realized, oh, this is what like very rich people are often paying for, is not to be with others.
Yeah. And do you think that's your preference? Not to be with others?
I think it's situational. I can own my privilege and preference of like, sometimes I do choose that for sure.
Right.
In that moment, we're like, oh, like it actually could have been more fun to be with others in that moment. Yeah. And in this way, like, when I was saying earlier, like I almost always would prefer a hostel, like a private room in a hostel to a private room to like a fancy hotel room, because I would rather like, there's a different dynamic or energy that I'm looking for.
Yeah, me too.
I got to like face my own, like, oh my gosh, I'm a privileged white woman, Black grossness, like had to face that in the moment of like, oh my God, are we really going to do this? And then own that that is part of me, and got to see myself actually really enjoy the experience and have a lot of fun. Now, for the rest of our lifetimes, have the chance whenever something happens to us and something's really expensive, we're like, yes, and it's not as expensive as the Blue Lagoon. It lives in infamy about how ridiculous that whole experience was.
Love it. That is quite a story and quite a way that you could spend money.
Yeah. It's so funny. I have another friend who lives in LA and she loves fancy things and has always been like, she's like shown me how to be comfortable in more fancy places. And she was like, when telling her the story, she was like, oh, I love those doors. There's only good things happen behind those types of doors.
All right. Relationships, instinct, privilege.
Yeah. These are some of our life lessons that we've learned along the way.
Yeah. For experience. Bravehearts, what are you learning this week? What experiences are teaching you lessons, even if they can be really big lessons or really small lessons.
And it can be a really big thing that comes with a really small lesson, or a really small thing that comes with a really big lesson.
Yeah, just keep open. Keep looking out for them. We love you.
Bye.
Do you need permission to be human? You got it.
Listen, subscribe, and review on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Learn more about us at permissiontobehuman.live.